Hey, what's up everyone? Force here, and today we're going to be checking out and reviewing Lords of the Fallen. This is the latest addition to the ever-growing Souls-like subgenre of action RPG. It is also the sequel to 2014's game that went by the same name, or at least it was supposed to be a sequel. Development of this one has been a little rocky to say the least. Lords of the Fallen 2 was first announced in 2015, with an original release date scheduled for 2017. However, after a few years in development, and with some reported struggles, the publisher CI Games and developer Deck 13 decided to part ways. Then, in 2018, CI Games announced that Defiant Studios would continue development, although that only lasted for a single year before CI terminated their contract due to what was called inadequate work. Ouch, that's gotta sting. The game went back on the shelf for about another year until CI Games opted to just found their own internal studio, which they called Hexworks, who would be rebuilding the game from scratch. Which brings us to today. Lords of the Fallen is no longer a sequel, but instead considered a reboot of the franchise, taking the same name and building upon the lore of the original, but hoping to land on much better footing. If you don't happen to recall, 2014's Lords of the Fallen was met with somewhat mediocre reviews, although I do remember liking the game well enough, as it was one of those first few early Souls alternatives that hit the market. Looking back on it, however, yeah, the game was a bit rough. Now, according to Hexworks in an interview that they did earlier this year, the goal with the new Lords of the Fallen is just to make it a much better game. They in fact stated that they are hoping this is going to be the second biggest reference point after FromSoft, of course, when people think about the Souls-like genre, going as far as to say, our strategy was that yes, we will be Dark Souls 4.5. That is quite the lofty goal, and I'm not certain that they'll quite achieve it, but I will say Lords of the Fallen is better than I expected. It's a little rough around the edges, to be sure. In fact, I would be surprised if this replaced anybody's all-time favorite Souls-like game. However, as a new alternative game in the genre, I'll say that I enjoyed my time well enough. I think Lords of the Fallen, it ain't too shabby. In fact, there are quite a few things that I liked about this one. So let's jump into talking about the game. Now, starting off with the gameplay loop, it follows the traditional push and pull formula of the genre. Explore, fight, loot, try not to die, return to safety, level up, getting stronger, before going back out and continuing to explore, fight, and loot. That is the basic formula of the genre, and Lords of the Fallen does not stray far from that path. Combat is also about what you expect. Melee takes the forefront here, with your melee attack options including light and heavy attacks, which you can alternate between for varied combos. There's also a charged heavy attack and a moving heavy attack, providing more alternatives, along with contextual attacks like attacks while sprinting, while dodging, and even while falling on enemies. You take all of that and you double it, because every single melee weapon in the game has both a one- and two-handed wielding option, each of those with their own unique movesets for all of the aforementioned different situations. And all of these options can be mixed and matched however you please. You can start with a light attack, swap to heavy, go back and forth in whichever order you like. You could also mid-combo swap between those one-handed and dual wielding or two-handed wielding variations, which provide double the attack variety. Tons of different combo and move potential here. There's also defensive options, of course. The game features blocking, parrying, and dodging. There is an assortment of different ranged weapons like bows and crossbows, throwables. These will consume ammunition, which is a limited but replenishable resource. The game also has plenty of magic with a variety of different spell classes and types. This will take the place of your ranged slot and consumes mana instead of ammo. And you'll be using all of these combat tools while taking on the expected assorted variety of enemies. Nothing here seemed out of the ordinary, either for better or worse. Melee, ranged, fast and slow, deadly and passive, exploders, casters, summoners, support, tanky, assassin. If you have played any Souls-like before, you pretty much know the sort of enemies that you'll be facing off against here. Nothing out of the ordinary, in good or bad. It is the ensemble of enemies that you expect to encounter in a Souls-like. Same goes for bosses. I would say there's good variety here, both in the visual presentation as well as the mechanical design, but not a lot of surprises either. They have taken clear inspiration from FromSoft and other Souls-likes. Most bosses appear to have at least two phases that they will go through as expected, with the second phase introducing bigger and deadlier attacks. I will say I found a majority of these fights to be of average difficulty. Some of these I would beat on the first try, others required numerous attempts, and I also found these fights to be far less flashy than their inspirations and then their counterparts. Well executed enough, but a little more reined in just design and presentation. I'd say the game in general is like less flashy compared to an Elden Ring or even a Dark Souls in a lot of ways. Now, as you play through the game, let's talk about level design. You'll be going through what are mostly linear spaces, but frequently dotted with branching paths and T-shaped intersections, all of which loop back into something else. It really does follow the tried and true design, combining semi-open spaces and tight corridors, all woven together to form an interconnected world with some areas blocked off until you find the means to bypass them. There's a good amount of location variety here. Old medieval castles, dungeons, swamps, caverns, forest, mountaintops. Great visual variety. Each one of the areas are distinctly named and quite different visual appearance as well. They really stand out from each other, basically. And all along the path, while exploring, while navigating, you're also going to come across the bonfire equivalent. These are known as vestiges. They're basically fallen lamp bearers in the game. You take on the role as a bearer of the lamp, which goes into the phasing between worlds, which we'll touch on in one moment. But the ones that came before you, the fallen lamp bearers, those are your bonfires. There's a few options at these. You can rest, which is the world reset, respawning enemies, restoring your health and filling your healing potions. You also have the ability to warp or fast travel to other vestige locations that you've previously unlocked. And then there is the upgrade, which is like the leveling up, where you will spend your soul's equivalent known as vigor, and you'll use that to enhance one of your attributes, be it strength, agility, endurance, vitality, radiance, or inferno. Now, I will say there is no actual like world map in the game. It's all about game exploration, going around, being immersed in the space, and just remembering how things are connected and how it all goes. There is a journal which displays what they call maps of the areas, but this isn't given to you as like some interactable, highly detailed thing. No, it's more like sketches that will show the designated area. Now, sometimes this will be an aerial view, sort of like a traditional map, but it's nothing that you can like really figure out navigation on. It just gives you major showcases of the general points of interest. Either way, it basically gives you a good idea of the major things of note in every particular space without clearly defining the path for you. Now, one of the more interesting twists of Lord of the Fallen is that it's two game worlds combined into one. Using what's called the Umbrell Lamp, you're able to lift the veil into the Umbrell Realm, which is a land of like undead or something like that. It basically acts as a varied mirror copy of the play space. So I would say like the topographical difference in the terrain between the two worlds is only about 15 to 20%. For the most part, all of the floors, the walls, the elevation, the layout, how everything is structured is pretty much the same, beyond a visual difference. Like in the Umbrell Realm, everything is spookier basically, but there is that 15 to 20% difference between the spaces, and this is basically providing the solution and ways to get across or bypass what are otherwise inaccessible areas. This can come in the form of the Umbrell Realm introducing you to a bridge that forms above what was otherwise a massive gap, or the fact that water is always vanishing in the Umbrell Realm, revealing whatever it is below, or you'll find blocked pathways, walls, doors that will disappear when transferred into the Umbrell Realm. Now, beyond navigating the terrain, the Umbrell Realm is also used to solve certain puzzles, I guess we'll call them. Basically, there are certain things and objects that you can interact with that are only visible and interactable inside of the Umbrell Realm. So sometimes if you come across a bypass, this is going to be the solution. Now, how this is all done is what's really cool. You carry a lamp on your hip at all times, and actually lifting it up will show you in real time that alternate dimension. And then whatever the difference is between the two, it will be visually displayed in what would be like the light source cone, more or less. Now, you can then either walk with the lamp, and you can actually use that to like phase through walls as long as it's just a wall barrier. But otherwise, you have the option with the key press to manually phase from the normal world into the Umbrell variation. While there's a ticking clock. As time passes, the number of enemies and variety of enemies becomes increasingly stronger, denser, and more difficult. But in turn, you gain this multiplier rewarding more vigor, again, the soul's equivalent from the enemies that you kill. Now, when I first went into this game, I was really worried that I would be like every 5 seconds constantly having to lift the lamp to make sure I wasn't missing anything, but the way they've designed this is pretty smart. For the most part, it's pretty darn obvious when there is going to be an Umbrell variation to bypass an obstacle. In fact, all of these super important things the game wants to make sure you won't miss, you will not miss, because butterflies in various densities congregating around the areas where you want to switch to the Umbrell Realm, or at the very least lift up your lamp to see what's on the other side. Also, as you get close to other points of interest that require shifting to the Umbrell Realm, your controller will vibrate if you're playing with a controller, which I do recommend. Mouse and keyboard I don't think felt that great. And also your lamp will glow in and grow in glowing intensity. So they do a really good job, I think, of balancing the two, where I don't feel like I have to constantly lift my lamp after fighting every enemy to make sure I'm not missing anything. It's balanced pretty well. Design-wise, I was actually pretty impressed with this, because I was worried that was going to be the case, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it could be. Now, the Umbrell Lamp actually has a few additional functions beyond letting you see and swap between the two worlds. You've got this ability called Soul Flay, where basically it forms a tether onto certain objects in the Umbrell Realm. This will be to basically reveal items or add new traversal paths, like pulling a bridge towards you. And it can be used in combat as well, as you're able to Soul Flay enemies, pulling the soul out of their body, which then if you attack the soul, it builds up wither damage on their health bar. And wither is something both enemies and you have to contend with. If you take wither damage, basically your red health bar fills up with white. If you then receive damage, that white bar will entirely disappear, but you can counteract that and heal through the wither damage by attacking and dealing damage to enemies. So it's really interesting, this wither mechanic and how it interacts with your health. The Umbrell Lamp also has a siphoning ability. This basically acts as a vacuum. You can suck up souls. It also is used to add soul flay charges with these certain little objects that are found on the walls in the world. And then finally, you've got the ability to place down a vestige seedling. You'll see flower beds in certain locations in the world scattered in between the various bonfires. If you plant a seedling on one of those flower beds, it basically acts as a mobile vestige location for you, a mobile bonfire. It does require a limited resource. You'll find these while you play, or they can also be purchased from certain vendors. So how does progression in the game work, right? We've got the world, we've got the enemies, we've got the combat I'm playing. How am I progressing? How am I advancing through the story? How am I making my character stronger? Well, the essential, as I mentioned, the loop works like you go out, you fight, you loot, and you gather up souls or vigor, and then you use that to level up your character. Now, every time you level up, you get to choose what stat you want to increase, and essentially it works to, you will either be scaling up your weapon or magic damage, adding more health, more stamina, and then along with a few of these, you also get increased defenses and resistances. Also, in a form of progression will be the fact that you are looking for loot. You will find various weapons, armor, accessories, and spells. Many of the really good items in the game have these predetermined locations, basically exact spots or bodies that they spawn on, or spots on the ground. This is the sort of thing where as you do exploration, you look around corners, you look above and below you, you will see these little glowing lights, and that is loot. And a lot of times that can be a really good weapon or armor piece, accessory, or spell. You'll also be making, throughout the course of your progression of playing this game, frequent visits back to Skyrest. Now, you gain access to this area after defeating the first main boss, and this basically acts as a centralized location for any NPCs you unlock in your playthrough, as well as vendors, which are the NPCs, and this is where you do a lot of the game's progression outside of the leveling up. This is where you upgrade your stuff. So you can upgrade weapons using shards to gain plus weapon level. This comes with pretty massive boost to damage. In fact, a few of the points in the game while playing, I felt like I hit really hard difficulty increases. It turned out to just be a matter of me needing to level up my weapon. You can also increase your healing. Basically, the potions in this game, you'll find items that can upgrade it, increasing the number of charges and then also improving the amount healed. There's also improvements for your lamp. This is primarily in the socket. You're able to put eyes that you find into the lamp, and these give you a variety of different kinds of buffs. Like right now, I'm using one that makes it so that whenever I perfectly time a dodge against an enemy, it applies a little bit of wither to their health bar, basically giving me free extra damage. And then, like any good Souls-like progression through the game, is just about going out, exploring, finding hidden paths, finding the new various loot and spells, going towards and defeating the major bosses, leveling up, and unlocking new areas, either by having to bypass a boss that acts as a gate, or actually having to go through a real gate. There are tons of different areas that require very specific keys for you to gain access. These keys will either be found found in the world, found on an enemy, or can be purchased from certain vendors back in Skyrest. So multiplayer, the game has multiplayer. This is fantastic, really, from what I saw. At any one of the vestiges in the game, you can boot up a multiplayer session. It's got 4 different options. You can beckon another player, which is just going to summon in a random player. You can beckon a friend, which lets you manually add anyone from your Steam's friend list, sends them an invite, they click accept, and they're just spawn right into your game. You can accompany another player, which basically puts you in the pool for anyone searching for another player, or you can join a random player as an aggressor in what is this game's form of PvP. Although I'll be honest, I unfortunately didn't actually get to see any of this in action because in the pre-release review build, too few people were playing. No one invaded me, and I didn't see anyone when I attempted to invade. So we'll have to see how this plays out at launch. Now, I gotta say, I think the co-op is exceptionally well done. They did a great job. It is super easy for you to have a friend join you, or for you to just join a friend and play together without any restrictions. I mean, there is a leashing where basically the guest will be leashed to the host, so they can't move too far away or they can't get too far behind. Otherwise, they will be summoned in next to the host. But it is full unrestricted co-op in that there's no like in Elden Ring where you were designated to specific areas. In this game, once you're summoned in, you can just keep playing and you can go everywhere together. And I felt like it was pretty good. My biggest gripe though is that it does seem like the guest isn't able to collect any of that static loot. So those pre-designated spawns of items, of accessories, of gear, it seems like the only loot that they can pick up is getting souls off of enemies or any loot that randomly drops off of enemies, because besides the pre-designated loot, there is also like a random pool of loot that can drop from the various enemies that you fight. They can pick up that, but any of the pre-designated specific items that are found in exact locations, which are usually the best stuff, it looks like the guest can never pick that stuff up. So that is rather unfortunate, I have to say. Now, difficulty. I want to talk about this. This is really interesting because I actually found a lot of the game pretty easy until it wasn't. There were some rather significant difficulty spikes in the game because it's made up of all these branching paths. I, on several occasions, found myself basically out of my depth. I would have had wandered into an area and faced off against enemies that provided a significant challenge. Mainly, they took a lot of damage and they did a lot of damage. And it just ended up being that I happened to stumble into these spots. In fact, on a few occasions, I even missed a few boss fights. And then later on, going back to and further exploring, I was able to find them. But what this ended up meaning is that there were points in my playthrough where I would come up against this hard wall, and it made it clear to me that I wasn't quite ready for that yet. So either that meant going back and farming up to level up, increasing my health or my stamina or increasing my damage, or I even missed the entire mechanic of leveling up my weapon because the weapon blacksmith was next to a boss that I hadn't discovered, and I was trying to wander into areas that were just, everything was way too tough for me. It took way too long to kill. I died in 1 or 2 hits. So because the game isn't fully linear, because there's a lot of branching paths, and frankly, because there's a lot of stuff that you can miss if you are not thoroughly exploring, that ended up resulting in some pretty hard walls that I found myself coming up against on several occasions in my playthrough. But that was offset by the fact that besides those big spikes, a lot of the rest of the game felt pretty easy. So it's like easy, can't do it, and then you farm yourself up, level up your weapon, you fight a boss that you hadn't fought, you find a new weapon, and then it's easy spike, and that's kind of how it felt like that was kind of the back and forth when it comes to how the difficulty was. It wasn't a very smooth progression, I guess is what I would say. Onto visuals and performance. I do have to say that overall, I think the game visually looks good. It's a good presentation. I like the art style and direction. Although the fidelity isn't the greatest, this isn't like the most high quality textures and animations, I do overall think it's a pretty good looking game, especially from a small to medium sized studio that this game's developer is. And performance wise, for me, it was generally good. For a lot of the playtime, I averaged around 100 and 140 FPS. Now for reference, I am running an RTX 3080 with an i7 11700K, but there were definitely spots in the game, different areas of the map where I would experience some rather significant frame drops, going from that 100 to 140 average down to like 40, 50, 30 at times. And these were pretty significant, rather noticeable chugging. It's more the variation than anything, right? I'd rather it be like a smooth 60 than have like 100 to 140 and then go down to 30. But that was just my experience with my particular setup. Keep in mind, of course, performance will vary. I don't know how performance has been for anyone else. I haven't spoke to anyone else who's reviewing the game. This is one of those things where we'll just have to wait and see once it hits the mass market, once it fully releases, how performance is across the board. So that is the basic overview of the game. I want to quickly run through my impressions, starting with the good. I think they did a pretty good job with combat. A lot of this game is a little rough around the edges. It's not quite as crisp. It doesn't feel quite as snappy, quite as good as, say, Dark Souls or as, say, Elden Ring. But for what it is, I think it is totally satisfactory. I overall enjoyed the combat and thought it felt pretty good. I loved the co-op. I'm really looking forward to doing more of that because I think it is very well implemented, with the exception of the fact that I did experience a little bit of latency, like a few milliseconds delay, which resulted in messing up my timing of my attacks and dodging when I was joining a friend as the guest when they were the host. Outside of that, the way co-op is implemented and how it's designed, I thought was really good. I really like the world design and level design, and overall, I just enjoyed playing it. I thought this was just a pretty decent Souls-like game. Onto the bad, boss fights were pretty mixed for me. With few exceptions, I found most of them to be pretty easy. Rather simplistic and stripped down feeling boss fights. I don't know, they weren't super impressive to me, honestly. The multiplayer latency is another tick in the bad. Like I mentioned, hopefully that's something that is resolved at release. Performance was a little too variable for me, even though most of the time it was good. When it was bad, it was really noticeably bad, and that really pulled me out of it. There were some bugs, but not tons. Like I would get one where enemy characters would get stuck in the wall or up on a ledge or something and kind of glitching out for a bit. There were a few occasions when certain interactables wouldn't be working. Like I'd go up to a vestige point and try to interact with it to like reset the world quickly as I was getting chased, and just the interaction key just didn't pop up. So that was a little frustrating. And yeah, just generally speaking across the board, while I do think the game is fairly well done, it is a rougher around the edges. It's not as polished as a Dark Souls, as an Elden Ring, as a Sekiro, as a Bloodborne. It's not quite to that level, but it's close. It is pretty close. So to wrap it all up, my overall thoughts of Lords of the Fallen are that while it does start a little slow, like the first few areas, the first hour or so was a bit of a drag and frankly left me with a rather lukewarm impression. But after continuing to play through, spending more time with the game, getting a better hand of combat, taking on more bosses, exploring more, seeing more areas, seeing more enemy variety, I continuously found myself enjoying the game more and more. I really, really like how they've done co-op. It is super easy to get a friend in and play together, and overall it's quite fun with how the game is laid out. Overall, I just think it's a solid game. I'm not doing the number rating thing, but it's something that I would recommend if you like Souls-likes and you're looking for a new, different Souls-like. Like I said at the top, for most people, I don't think they're gonna feel it's better than Dark Souls or better than Bloodborne or better than Elden Ring, but not bad. It's not a bad game. I would recommend it if you like this genre and you want something maybe not as good, but new and different. There you go. That's it for me today. That is the review of Lords of the Fallen. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm still liking it. I'm going to continue playing. I really want to go through and play and spend some time with New Game Plus as well. Try different classes. They've got a bunch of different starting classes in the game, some advanced variations as well. I just played the basic strength guy with big weapons, hits hard. That's a lot of fun, but I want to try some of the more magic stuff as well. All right, that does it. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time.